Hi everyone, I'm Faras. In this video, I'm going to tell you about the history of the Dutch colonization of Indonesia. But before we started, please leave a subscribe and a thumbs up down below. Thanks. The first Dutch expedition to Indonesia was in 1595. This was led by Cornelius de Houtman. In 1596, the Dutch expedition had made contact with the Portuguese and Indonesians. Then at the start of the century, in 1602, the Dutch East India Company was established. Another name for the Dutch East India Company is the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, more commonly known as the VOC. The VOC was made to arbitrate trade in the Indian Ocean and to assist in War of Independence from Spain. Only a year after the VOC was created, the Dutch built their first permanent trading post in Banten, West Java. In 1611, the Dutch weren't the only ones in Indonesia. The British established several trading posts in Indonesia. The British were renamed in Indonesia until 1824. 2 years later, on January 27, 1623, a Dutch fleet arrived at Solar. There were nearly 30 Portuguese and 1,000 natives to defend the fort for Captain Manuel of Paris. Yet, after 3 months of siege, the Dutch finally had Solar Fortress on April 18, 1613. The Dutch were renamed Fort Hendrikus. In 1619, the Dutch were renamed the city of Jakarta to Batavia, and it became the new VOC headquarters. Then on February 27, 1623, the chief actor of the English East India Company, Gabriel Towerson, was put on trial and beheaded along with 9 other Englishmen, 10 Japanese traders, and 1 Portuguese man for conspiracy against the Dutch. This will be known as the Ambonia Massacre because it took place on the island of Ambonia. The Dutch East Indies was formed to bring all of Indonesia under one government. Not much else would happen in the 16th with the Dutch, but a lot of violence will follow in the 17th. In the 17th, there were 3 wars which the Dutch were involved in with Indonesia: the first, the second, and the third Javanese War. The first Javanese War started when a slave named Surapati organized a large group of natives against the Dutch. King Amankorat of Mataram took notice and gave refuge to the slave when the Dutch attempted to capture him. After his stay in Mataram, Surapati moved to the northeastern part of Java and named himself king. As a result of his action, the Dutch took Amankorat out of power and put Amankorat's uncle on the Mataram throne over a period of time. His name was Pakubuwono, and he and the Dutch would eventually defeat Amankorat, who fled to the east with Surapati. The Dutch were still in hot pursuit of Amankorat and Surapati. In 1708, the Dutch exiled Amankorat to Sri Lanka and killed Surapati. In the Second Javanese War, Pakubuwono died, so there was lots of fighting about who will take his crown. The Dutch supported who they thought would do what they wanted the best. It took about 4 years of war for the Dutch to capture all their rivals. Soon after, the Dutch sent them all into exile. During this, Dutch expanded their territory in Java. Finally, in the third and last Javanese War, King Pakubuwono III faced 2 challengers to the throne. Pakubuwono received military support from the Dutch though. In 1751, the Dutch were shocked and defeated, during which their commander was brutally killed. One of the challengers agreed to the Chianti Agreement in 1755, which split Mataram in 2. Pakubuwono got the eastern half of Mataram and the challenger got the western half. The other challenger resisted until he finally made peace with the Dutch in 1757 and was given a portion of eastern Mataram. In the 17th, the Dutch were fighting in the Javanese Wars for most of the time. In 1800, the Dutch East India Trading Company was broke and slowly fell apart. All its land was then named the Dutch East Indies. In 1801, the British took over the region of Minahasa, but in 1802, the Treaty of Amiens was signed and Maluku were returned to the Dutch. In 1817, the British got control of Malacca again to split the land in half. The Dutch and the British would sign the Treaty of London. The Dutch would get most of Indonesia and the British would get Malaya, Singapore, and other islands. In the same year, the Dutch had a direct rule from Riau from 1825 to 1830. There was another war called the Java War. The Java War was caused by Prince Diponorogo because the Dutch built roads over the tombs of the prince's parents. In 1830, 50,000 European soldiers were killed and the prince lost 200,000 civilians and soldiers in the Java War. The prince was then set up and put in jail by the Dutch due to the colonization of the province of Aceh. There was a war between the Dutch and the Sultanate of Aceh, which lasted from 1873 to 1930. From 1901 to 1910, the regions of Bali, Borneo, Moluccas, and Sulawesi were all taken over by the Dutch. By the end of the Aceh War in 1913, the Dutch also had taken over Aceh. Not much happened until 1938, when the Dutch had turned down the independence petition proposed by the Indonesians. 4 years later, the Japanese declared war on the Dutch and invaded the Dutch East Indies. From 1942 to 1945, Japan occupied the Dutch East Indies. In 1945, the Dutch regained control over the Dutch East Indies. From 1945 until 1949, the Dutch and Indonesia fought for independence. Following the defeat of Japan, Indonesian independence was declared in 1945, and the Netherlands finally recognized the independence of the new country in 1949. Finally, their 3.5 century long rule came to an end. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.